Shalom uvracha. Hello and blessings to everyone tuning in and joining us for our fifth installment of Three Opinions, a weekly conversation on Jewish life, culture, and identity based on the age-old adage that when two Jews come together, there are invariably three opinions. Tonight, I am joined by the wonderful, the insightful Molli Spalter, and we are going to chat about the complex world of Ultra-Orthodoxy, Molli's personal Jewish journey that led her into and out of that world, and also what healing, understanding, and the rebuilding or reconceptualizing of Jewish life and identity looks like after the complexity of those years of her life. So before we dive in, Molli, I have to do my due diligence and let everyone know a little bit about you, which I think is kind of funny because the little bit of bio I'm throwing out is not nearly as personal and as about you as deep as about you as we're going to be discussing, but all the same, here's my quick little intro. So Molli is a PhD candidate in literary and cultural studies at Wayne State in Detroit, with a focus on women and gender studies. Her writing and research cover the topics of motherhood, sexuality, religion, and feminist social movements. She teaches a variety of English and literature courses at Wayne State and Oakland Community College and serves as the managing editor for Criticism, a quarterly for literature and the arts. Molli is a wanderer, a poet, a vegetarian, and a fantastic teacher. Molli, thank you for joining me and thanks for agreeing to share your story. It's not an easy one to share, to say the least, but it's a powerful one, an important one, and one that we need to hear. So before we go any further, I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you for having me. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, so I usually end up talking way too much during these interviews, but if it's okay with you, I'm going to just let you take over, okay. Share your journey in whatever way makes the most sense to you for this conversation. I realized in the short little blurb that I used to introduce you that it highlighted you as a wanderer, and maybe that's a good place for us to start to explain what that wandering has looked like for you, especially what that wandering for your Jewish journey and your Jewish identity has looked like, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Yoni, for having me and for the opportunity to share my personal journey and the steps I've taken to become who I am as a Jew today. So just a bit about the past 20 years of my life. I grew up in a conservative home with a really strong sense of my Jewish identity. I went to Hillel Day School, which is the local day school here in Detroit, and had dreams of becoming a rabbi when I got older. I was very deeply connected to my Jewish heritage and to Jewish customs and to Jewish beliefs. And they really, those beliefs really informed like every choice I made and the things that I did and the people that I was friends with and the way that I saw myself. At 16, I participated in some teenage behavior that was not the best choice. And had consequences for that behavior. And part of those consequences led to my involvement with the Chabad movement. And I was seeking to reconnect with my Jewish roots after what I saw as a consequential decision that I had made, a bad choice that I had made. And decided that the way to recreate myself and to reconnect with my Jewish roots was to go all the way. So on one day, I was a regular conservative Jewish kid. And the next day I decided to cut off all ties with any of the non-religious friends that I had. I stopped talking to boys. I started wearing long skirts and long sleeves, following the modesty rules. I started keeping kosher and not typical kosher, but like chalav Yisrael and pas Yisrael. I really took everything to the extreme. And before moving on, I want to point out that this is my personal experience, and this is not, what I'm sharing is not true for all people who join Ultra-Orthodoxy. I think that different people connect with different forms of Judaism in different ways, and I respect people's personal decisions, but this is a reflection of my own experience. So I became completely entrenched in this world of Chabad, and formed some really, really strong relationships with other young women who were part of the Chabad movement. They provided me with a lot of support that I had stopped myself from being able to receive from other peers because of my choice to make this big life change. And I left the school that I was at, moved to a modern Orthodox day school. From there, I then moved to a Chabad school, and I spent 11th and 12th grade at a Chabad school. And the majority of my time was spent learning Hasidic texts, and really, I've always had like a really strong desire to connect intellectually to Judaism. So I spent a lot of time really like getting into the texts and getting to know what Judaism meant from this perspective. I went to Israel for seminary for a year, and spent more time doing with that same goal in mind, and came back to the US. I got married, had a child, and eventually I began to realize that the brand of Judaism that I was practicing did not, by practicing this brand of Judaism, I had lost sight of the things that had mattered to me in the past. And I decided to enroll in college classes, which was something that is generally frowned upon in certain Orthodox circles. But it was something that was important to me because as I said, I have like, I tend to invest intellectually in things, and like I really missed that rigor, intellectual rigor. So I started going to college, took a couple classes, that was at OCC. I ended up switching to Eastern, and my first English class there, and I was majoring in English, my first English class there was cross-listed with a women's studies course. And I was not prepared for what I was about to learn. I actually had no idea what I was getting into. And one day my professor pulled me aside and she said, hey, here are some resources I think that you should read about Judaism and women's studies. And I was like, those two things aren't written about in the same text. What are you talking about? And eventually, after like being introduced to more and more readings and finding more readings on my own, I decided to start writing my undergraduate thesis. I changed my undergraduate major to gender studies and English, and I wrote my undergraduate thesis about the requirement for Muslim women to wear hijab and how that impacts women in the Muslim community. Now, as somebody who was hiding the fact that I was wearing a wig and covering my hair, and did not reveal that to anybody until long after I graduated, I was in like a really awkward situation because I was writing about Muslim women, but really I was writing about myself and trying to figure out my own relationship to covering my hair and my own relationship to modesty through the lens of Islam. And this was something that I still laugh about now because like clearly I should have been writing my thesis about Jewish women covering their hair. But I didn't yet have like the tools to articulate how I was feeling. And so this was like a working through for me. So I eventually made the decision to leave Chabad after all of this time spent learning about gender studies and about women's role. And I started doing more research after I wrote my thesis. I started doing more research about how like particularly Jewish women are impacted by the modesty rules, and spent some time thinking about my own life and what I felt, how I felt my life had been impacted by these rules that I didn't get to choose for myself. I stopped going to mikvah, which is a requirement for married women in Orthodox movements, and realized that the choices that I had made when I was 16 were no longer to live this life were no longer the choices that I wanted to continue abiding by. So I left Ultra-Orthodoxy, I got divorced, and I am now a PhD candidate at Wayne State studying women's studies and English, and have lots to share about what it means to leave Orthodox Judaism, what it means to join Orthodox Judaism, and hope that this insight will encourage others to think about how their own relationship to Judaism and their own relationship to like what it means to be a Jewish feminist or what it means to be a Jewish non-feminist. So yeah, that's what I've got.
Awesome. Thank you. So just up front, I just want you to tell me in advance if there's any questions or getting too personal or you think are missing kind of the focus of what we should be speaking about anyway, please just let me know and I'm happy to redirect. But I agree with you completely that this conversation is one that needs to happen because there's a lot of different reasons why these stories need to be told. And again, I also thank you for starting this off by saying that this isn't a critique of anyone who joins Ultra-Orthodoxy or is born into Ultra-Orthodoxy, but that there are different approaches to spirituality, and some work for some people and some don't. And there's part of the conversation that we're navigating is what works and why it works for some people, and how to respect when it doesn't. And that can be a more personal challenge for a lot of communities as well. So I know, just a heads up to everyone listening, I know very, very little of your story going in other than what my wife has told me. But she has also said, this isn't really my story to tell and you need to talk to Molly about it. And so I'm kind of coming into this blind as well in some ways. And I don't think I realized how quickly your shift was, where it was, I mean, in your words, almost within a day of just saying, okay, SNEAS, kosher, like this is just a decision I'm making overnight. I mean, that sounds like as someone who also kind of dives right into things, that sounds like how I would do it.
I want to add really quickly that my mother told me not to. So this is not an indictment of the adults in my life. I'm very strong-willed and I insisted upon this. Okay. You can.
Right. Well, there's also nothing that ensures someone doing something quite like a Jewish mother telling you not to do something. That also kind of expedites the process usually too. So I'm sure just before we talk about some of these things, I also want to spend a good deal talking about life after Ultra-Orthodoxy, because I think that presents its own challenges and its own different elements that I don't think a lot of people think about or are willing to think about. But I just want to address some of the ideas of if this happens so quickly, I'm sure a lot of the emotional things that were taking place in this whirlwind of a time had to be completely overwhelming. Did you have time to process these things while they were happening, or was it just kind of in reflection, oh my God, I'm married, I have a child, did you know what I mean? Like, did it feel like there was ample time to discuss and process while these things were taking place?
So I think that what happened in each stage when I was like making these big life choices, so like joining Ultra-Orthodoxy, deciding to get married, deciding to have a child. So the deciding to get married and deciding to have a child, that was part of the bigger plan that was laid out for me by the Orthodox movement, by Chabad. And when I say the Orthodox movement, I was part of Chabad, so I want to make sure I'm speaking specifically about Chabad, because I'm not familiar with all the different sects and how that women exist in those worlds. So it is the expectation that Chabad women get married and get pregnant and have children. And so I don't recall thinking about it. I actually received a phone call from a friend from a past life, like the day I found out I was pregnant, and he was like, Molly, I really think that you need to think about this. I also received phone calls before I got married. Molly, think about this. And I was like, stop calling me, because like, I didn't want to have to think about it. I didn't want to have to spend the time like diving into like the psychology of why I was doing this. Does this actually have anything to do with Judaism, or is this just a crutch? So the pause moments for me didn't happen until I saw role models, female role models outside of Orthodox Judaism and Judaism who were modeling what a strong woman could look like. Because there were lots of strong women in Chabad, and like one of the models of Chabad is that women can be strong women within the movement, within the Chabad movement, as long as they are abiding by the expectations of modesty, tzniut, and behaving along those lines. So I saw lots of strong women. So I saw in Chabad the ability for me to be a strong woman, but I didn't realize that there were other models for that would be satisfying to me. So no, I didn't have much time to pause until I was able to like intellectually assess what was happening in my life.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, something similar is Chabad is unique in the fact that I think the Rebbetzin especially plays such a significant role in a way where there are really successful Chabad houses and Chabads on campus where people might not know the name of the rabbi, but know the Rebbetzin really well, which represents a kind of an interesting take on a strong Jewish femininity, but also has a different expectations of roles and what the role of the Jewish mother is supposed to be.
Absolutely.
That complicates things, I'm sure, from an idea of Jewish feminism. Was feminism important to you before joining Ultra-Orthodoxy? Was it something that you thought about?
Yes. So as I said, I wanted to be a rabbi, and I had there was a rabbi at Hillel when I was a student there who I looked up to and who I wanted to be like. So I knew that feminism had a place in Judaism, but I want to speak to this idea of having a strong female role in Chabad houses, because this is something that I think that we often gets lost in the conversation about Jewish feminism. So for me, feminism, it is not feminist to merely make a choice and be a woman. So let's say I put on a face of makeup and I walk outside and I say, you see this face? This is feminism. I did my makeup and I wanted to. So that means it's a feminist choice that I made. If I only have a limited set of options to choose from, either to go out into the world with a full face of makeup and be received well by the world, or not to have a full face of makeup and have negative consequences for that, there is no real choice there. So when we talk about like Chabad women choosing to participate in Chabad houses and Chabad women choosing to cook dinner, or Orthodox women to choose to cook dinner and raise 17 children and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and also take care of the Chabad community, it is strong and women are showing that they can do these things. But the root of the question for me when we talk about Jewish feminism is, do they want to do these things? Do they have alternative options that can they say no? And if they can't say no without consequences, then it's not actually Jewish feminism, it's Jewish expectations in the guise of Jewish feminism. And I think that that's something that like we really need to think about, we as in like the people in the world, not you and I, when we talk about Jewish feminism.
For sure. That is a very, very important point. So let me ask also, what was, as a woman in Chabad, kind of under this guise of what's expected of who you're supposed to be in your family and also within your community, what was your spiritual life like? Especially as someone who was growing up wanting to be a rabbi, and I'm sure making some of these decisions because there was a spiritual and theological reason for making those decisions. What was this might be as personal as I can possibly get, but what was your relationship with God like when you were in this? And also, what did that relationship look like when you started to question within it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did join because I needed spirituality and I needed to be connected to God, and I had lost that connection. I felt that I had lost that connection. And I was able to, like, because I had a strong, I knew Hebrew well. So this is like unique to me as a Baal Tshuva who came from a Hebrew speaking background to Chabad. I was able to like sit down with the Siddur and like read the prayers and like get it and mean it. And I invested
So just really, really quickly, can you just explain what a Baal Tshuva is for
Sure.
folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So a Baal Tshuva or a Baalat Tshuva is somebody who returns to God. So it's somebody who was not previously religious and then becomes religious.
Great.
And many people who do become religious after not being religious don't have access to Hebrew, and so like will often struggle with prayers or with learning Torah in Hebrew because they didn't know the language beforehand. And so I kind of like flowed seamlessly into this new role in my life because I was able to tackle the words that I was saying. I was able to integrate myself into the services and into the religious schools because I had that linguistic background. So I was like really deeply rooted in prayer and before I got married and continued to be after I got married. And then I got pregnant. And as I was pregnant, I was like talking to God every single day and like really talking to God, like personal conversations, you know? And that was so much a part of like who I was. And then I had a child and I couldn't go to synagogue as often. And then I would pray at home and found it difficult to connect without community because so much of what I needed from Ultra-Orthodoxy was community. And then I went back to synagogue and I wanted to sing and I wanted to like engage my child in this, and I wasn't allowed to sing because there are men present in the services, and according to Orthodox Judaism, women can't sing in front of men. And I hadn't felt this before and started feeling it after having a child because I wanted to be able to integrate him into my own relationship with God as he developed his own. And then when I left Chabad, I started calling myself an atheist because I didn't know how to reconcile my new beliefs in myself and in the world with no longer being connected to God through the ways that I had previously connected to God and to spirituality. And I still struggle with it. And one of the best things that I did to help improve my spirituality was send my kid to Hillel Day School because I was able to recall that Judaism is not one thing. Judaism is a million different things and can be practiced in a million different ways. And there's no right way to do Judaism. And so I've been able, through watching my son remind me, like, hey, Mom, let's read this pasuk together. Or, I mean, he's not that enthusiastic about it, but I will pretend that he is. But when I get to engage with him and be reminded, like, I can be studying women's studies and also be reading passages from the Torah, and that doesn't make me a hypocrite, and like refind my spirituality through that. And to be honest, my feminism for me is spiritual because at the basis of what it means for me to be a Jew is to advocate for equal rights. So my work, my feminist work, my anti-racist work, that is Jewish work for me. And so learning to redefine my spirituality, learning to redefine what it means to be connected to God has been like a life-changing experience. And seeing people like you who advocate for Jewish things, it has been like life-altering, really. And like I barely know you, as you said, I know Meredith, but like your face, seeing rabbis and other leaders, Jewish leaders, do good outside of the constraints of what it says verbatim in the Torah has helped me remember what spirituality can be and should be for me personally.
Well, that means a lot. Thank you. It's an important question, and I think it's a issue that a lot of people don't recognize when it comes to people leaving the frum world. So apologies, we're throwing around a lot of terminology that I'm going to try to define while we're talking to. So frum is a Yiddish word meaning religious, so it's usually just what people say when they're talking about an ultra-Orthodox communities. But for a lot of people, especially when they see the TV shows that have become so popular lately with Unorthodox and One of Us and some of these other shows, they think that, and I think they're portrayed in this way too, where especially these women leave and then the perception is they're free. Finally, like everything is just good now, and all of the restraints that were on them things that were holding them back are now gone, and they can just finally be themselves. When in actuality, like in everything in life, things are more complicated than that. And for some of my friends who I knew in New York who grew up Haredi and left, used incredible resources like Footsteps or some other organizations that do really amazing work for people who are leaving the Frum community. For some of those people, the hardest part was recognizing that even though some of the things that didn't feel true to who they were no longer in place, there were also moments of great loss that came with it. And that shouldn't be forgotten in a kind of a judgmental sense of this isn't the community for me and therefore everything's bad, but them saying, here I am, and now I guess I have to call myself an atheist, but that doesn't feel good to who I am. And there's part of my mourning of missing out on the nigunim of that were so central to who I was, these melodies of my community, or the davening or the praying of my community, or that sense of community that exists in some of these communities that are, I think, really powerful binding elements that people really mourn for when they leave. And even if it's completely the right decision and it's the correct decision for them to not be parts of these communities, that doesn't mean that there's not the complication of loss that comes with it too. I'm just wondering if you felt some of that even when you were outside of those bounds to say, this wasn't for me, but here's also some of the parts that I still have to wrestle with that I miss, or that feel like loss.
Absolutely. So before I start, I do want to say that the opposite of frum is frei, or free. So there is this sense of like, and that's in Yiddish. And so when you leave Ultra-Orthodoxy, there is this like expectation that now you live like a free life. My life is deeply complicated by having a child whose father is still Ultra-Orthodox, and leaving behind a community that I'm still in such close proximity to. So I was religious for 12, 13 years. And the relationships that I built, I mean, during a time when I was in I had a baby, I got married, like big, huge life moments. These relationships were like really, really deep, very important to me. And these people watched me as I like became who I was and who I am now. I mean, I am who I am because of them. And so losing them was very, very hard. At first, when I decided to get a divorce, I lost so many relationships with friends. People were very judgmental. They were, because I was upending my child's life. And the focus was not on me being happier and me feeling whole and me therefore being able to be a better mom. But the focus was on shattering expectations and what people saw as like the right way to live. So that was really hard for me. It continues to be hard for me. Sometimes I want to pick up the phone and be like, hey, so-and-so, remember that time that we did X? I've been thinking about that, but like, it's not appropriate because those relationships are no longer there. I do try to maintain relationships with some of the people that I was friends with, but we have such different lives now. And my leaving feels like an indictment to them, probably feels like an indictment of their lifestyle. But I also have friends who are still in the religious community who are open to a relationship with me and who aren't offended by my tattoos or my cries for equal rights for women. So like, we as adults, we have to make choices and recognize that the choices that we make are going to impact us, and that it's sad. And I think about it often, but it's something that had to happen, and something that I don't regret, obviously don't regret leaving. So I do miss them though. There is loss in that. There's also, as you said, the loss of like community. So that I sometimes on Friday night will like hum to myself nigunim that that I used to sing at the Shabbat table with my family. Sometimes it'll be the middle of the week and I'll demand that my child make challah with me so that I can like smell it and remember that feeling. So he's become used to that. And so, yeah, so like there is definitely loss, but there's also gains. There's so many gains. I've met so many wonderful new people who want to learn more about my life history and who have helped me learn to be a better person as well. So that goes hand in hand.
I'm struck just by even the language that we use while even talking. I mean, it was just coming to mind when we were talking about from and fry, and the idea of getting a divorce or asking for a get because it has nothing to do with you, right? Then it's all about the family unit and shattering the family unit or the expectations that I just so built into this is so many different ideas of judgmental language that I think is problematic for both sides of us, right? That for ultra-Orthodox and non-ultra-Orthodox Jews to be able to talk about each other in that way of kind of labeling each other, and even the idea of saying if someone is no longer within that world, then the language is that they're off the derech, right? They're not on the path anymore. It's not just they've chosen to be secular or a different type of Judaism. They're gone. They're off the derech. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they'll get back on the derech someday, but that's the idea, right? And we specifically in I think conservative Judaism and other forms of Judaism don't speak in that language because we know how problematic it can be to say either you're in or you're out. Yeah. And I think that it's a testament to some people within this community to not use that language and to say like, no, your tattoos don't offend me and I want to hear what you're talking about. And maybe that might not be my lifestyle, but we're people, right? We have to transcend all of that crazy language, the labeling and the narishkeit of that. And I think the psychology of that, because the language, as I'm speaking to someone who's a PhD candidate in language and literature, right? That language is powerful. Words carry so much weight and power. And when you use them and incorporate them into your everyday argot, then it becomes a judgmental thing that allows you to say who is part of you and who is not part of you.
Yeah. This conversation reminds me of an early conversation that I had with my ex-husband when we first got married. Right before we got married, I was at his father's house, and he has a lot of siblings, and one of his younger siblings referred to somebody who was Jewish but not religious as not Jewish. And I was like, hold up, what do you mean not Jewish? He's like, yeah, he doesn't keep kosher. He's not Jewish. And thinking about the power of language, like forget about the fact that that's like not okay. A Jew is a Jew, but like broadening the concept of Judaism to encompass like people who have tattoos, people who eat pork, people who just do different things. It's more than just the harmfulness of the language, but thinking about what Judaism would look like if the derech were a little bit wider, or if Jew meant more than just an observant person. And I think that as time passes and I am unlearning a lot of the habits that I had in Orthodox Judaism, what I'm finding is that so much of my self-hatred that I had and hatred of Judaism that I had after I left was because the only way I could envision Judaism, as I said earlier, was all or nothing. Jewish or not Jewish, on the derech, off the derech. So I appreciate you pointing to language here. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not lost on me that one of the sermons I got the most pushback on last year was a sermon where it was right after Rudy Giuliani was saying that George Soros isn't a Jew. He's more of a Jew than George Soros was. And recognizing that that people come from all over the political spectrum, but to say like, how bizarre in our world to have Jews who say, yeah, I guess Rudy Giuliani is more of a Jew to me than George Soros is. And to just point out like, how crazy is it that the world is evil and crazy and bizarre enough without Jews taking away other Jews' Judaism,
Yeah.
right? And saying you're Jewish because you align with my Judaism, or we can talk in a way that we both recognize each other. And I hear it all the time about Bernie Sanders too. He's not actually Jewish.
Yeah.
Why is he not Jewish? I mean, he's not Jewish because he is critical of Israel at times,
Yeah.
which is like if his beliefs are some kind of a qualifier for if he actually belongs to this people called Israel or not, which is just so antithetical to Jewish thought.
Yeah.
But to understand how all over the spectrum of Jewish identity, we feel better of knowing that we can kick people out of Judaism at our own will, instead of embracing kind of the age-old Jewish idea that we should be arguing and wrestling with each other while still calling each other Jewish, right?
Yeah.
That's tough, and that is, I think, like you pointed out, that does more harm to us than probably anything else, because it's hard to explain this to someone who's not Jewish, but it's more than dehumanizing to just take your Judaism away. It's like it's taking away your humanity, but also your ancestors' humanity, and like this ancient humanity that you have. It feels like visceral to your core. It's like taking away your roots in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to ask you a question. I want to be very careful about this because there's no topic I want to be more careful with than the topic of children. But I think when people see a lot of the shows and the documentaries that we had talked about earlier, one of the things that is kind of a reoccurring theme is to see how these can really pull down and get very intense of making sure that a child stays within that community at all costs. I'm not sure what the community is like here, but I know that in Brooklyn and certain places, a community will use up every dollar of its resources to make sure that a child doesn't leave that neighborhood or that lifestyle. And it becomes these huge fights and this huge battle that's not about just a specific family, but about an entire community. So I want to open that up in as careful of a way as I can to let you talk about any part that feels okay to talk about, and we completely respect any limits and boundaries there.
Yes, so I'm going to do my best to be respectful of my ex-husband. So I'm going to leave out some details, and respectful of my child, but I will talk around the issue. So I was made to be scared that I would lose my child. And this was not from a specific person. I mean, it was from specific people, but there was a community effort to make me feel afraid. That was a first step at not getting me to get divorced. Once it was abundantly clear that I was getting a divorce, there were leaders in the Chabad community who testified against me in court. Friends, family, people who I never thought would testify against me, who had been wrapped into this narrative that my leaving Orthodoxy was a sign of giving up on my child, when in fact, my leaving Orthodoxy was an attempt to save my child, and I succeeded, I believe, at opening up the world for him and for us. So there was a lot of pushback, and it was really scary. And I had it better than most women because I was not always frum, and I had ties to people in academia who were supporting me behind the scenes. And I had a support network outside of the Chabad community. So I was not completely isolated. And so I had some resources, and I was terrified, and I lost sleep, and I was in a lot of really bad situations, but I consider myself one of the lucky ones. I do want to mention that, because you mentioned getting a get, a divorce, a rabbinically sanctioned divorce. I never agreed to get a divorce because I was contacted once by the Vad HaRabbanim, the organization that, the Orthodox organization that gives divorces. And then they stopped calling me. And when I called them to find out whether or not, like, what I needed to do to sign my get, they said, oh, it's already been taken care of. So I was divorced Jewishly without my knowledge. And I say this to speak to the ways that women are marginalized within these situations, even as it pertains to their own lives. So we often talk about women in activist circles. We often talk about women who are not given a divorce by their husbands and they're then bound to them. And that is one form of oppression that women face in these circles where you have to have a get and where gets aren't given. And on the flip side, women are can be divorced without their knowledge. And there is a community effort in some communities to keep women from being involved in this process, to create a sense of fear and of isolation, so that the child will remain in a community. You drive someone crazy enough, they're going to lose it. And like, I definitely lost it a couple times because I was scared and I was protecting my child, thought I was doing my best to protect my child, and people were telling me that I wasn't. So I guess I'll end this this portion with a call to action, that we learn more about what happens in Orthodox communities after women leave, and advocate for and support women when they need it. And sometimes they might say that they don't need it, but just to have those resources available to women in Jewish communities that are not Orthodox communities, so that women know that they can go somewhere to like get the help that they need.
So that's how I want us to kind of bookend our conversation too, is to talk about these resources. Because I think that there could be a lot of different people listening to this and watching this. And I want to make sure that for anyone, they know what resources are available, who to talk to, different things like that for any of these. And also recognizing that since we're in the time of COVID, that kind of the geographical barriers are not as profound as they once were. So all I know is that for anyone who's watching in New York, Footsteps is an amazing organization. I will include a link to their website and tag them on this as well. They do great work and really focus on anyone who's leaving the Frum community, but especially for people who grew up in those communities and don't know any other life, and where for some people their only language that they are speaking is Yiddish, that they've never filled out a job application in English before, or been on a dating website before, or anything that can be outside of the community. So those resources exist. So I have, I guess, a few questions for you. So one, are there any local resources similar or resources in general in Metro Detroit that people should know about? And then I also want to ask you about books and literature and kind of your field as well, to make sure that we're reading the right things and educating ourselves in the right way as well.
Sure. So I am not familiar with any organizations in Detroit that help people who are leaving Ultra-Orthodoxy. I wish I was. I wish I would have been. What I do know is that there are some women in the Orthodox movement who appear to be those resources that are not. So just when you are speaking to people, please be wary of like who they are and what their ultimate aim is. But you are a resource, Yoni. I mean, you know, like you are somebody that people can talk to. And I think that reaching out to people that you trust and that have your best interest at heart is what is best. I wish, I don't, do you know of any organizations in Detroit? Because I don't. Yeah,
I don't.
They exist. It's such a, I mean, it's a small community and the percentage of people who leave is small. Most people, like when they're older, are moving away from Detroit. So I don't know. I hope that those resources exist.
And I guess I will take up the responsibility that you just pointed out. No, it's important for I think us as of clergy in the area too, to know that that we are definitely available for any resources and any help that anyone might need. And especially with the part that we talked about kind of at the beginning of this conversation too, that you don't have to be alone when you leave a community. There's and you don't have to be Jewishly alone when you leave a community. It's not Ultra-Orthodoxy or atheist secularism, right? That there's life with profundity and spirituality and meaning, that it's not everything or nothing or any, there's life is complex, identity is complex, and we're allowed to be in whatever places and spaces those are. So I hope that people who would find themselves in that situation would know that they can reach out to me, and I'm happy to put people in touch with anyone too. And I'm also going to suggest that anyone can also talk to you, Molly, because resources are good.
Yeah. And I also, so you said it's not atheism or orthodoxy, but also even if it is atheism, you can still have community and sing songs at your local conservative synagogue.
100%, definitely.
There's so much joy in that, for me personally, and for others, I'm sure as well. So like, it's okay to dabble and to learn and to be a part of something, some of the time, some of the way. So
yeah, I think what this whole initiative of Three Opinions was about more than anything else is to celebrate Jewish identity and all of its complexity and everywhere it goes. Because I think that I will never say who's living the correct form of Jewish life and an incorrect form of Jewish life, with this one exception, that I think the correct form of Jewish life involves wrestling and searching and having a little bit of tension that always exists with your thoughts and what's happening. That to me is just really, truly Jewish, right? To the idea of Talmudic Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism or secular Judaism or humanist Judaism, wherever you fall in the category, is still an idea of wrestling with the idea that life is really hard to understand. And if we're not wrestling with it, then we're kind of missing out on what it means to be part of the creation of that life. So for me, that's what we're trying to do as any kind of Jews, as we should be doing, is kind of upholding that idea of wrestling.
And that is the perfect transition into my academic suggestions for reading. So I have 2 book suggestions. These are not Jewish books, but when I think about my Jewish feminism, I think about the constraints of Orthodox Judaism as not like a new invention that Jews created, but as one iteration of what the broader patriarchy, or like the way that the world runs, how that is, the Jewish Orthodoxy is one iteration of a bigger problem in the world. So when I read feminist books, I then think about how I can apply them to my Jewish life and to Jewish life more broadly. So one book is called Living a Feminist Life by Sarah Ahmed. It is a wonderful read. It's really fast. And it is branded as a self-help book, but there's like a lot of really good feminist meat there. So I would suggest it to anybody who's looking to read more on feminism and to think about it in terms of Judaism. And then the other book is written by Audre Lorde. It's called Sister Outsider. And it's a collection of essays about Black feminism, but as a marginalized writer, I think that there's a lot to gain from that for people who are thinking about Jewish feminism as well.
Awesome. 2 amazing suggestions. I'll put both of those titles in our chat as well, just so people can look them up. I'm going to fill up the chat with a few more resources too, just so people are aware that there's some people doing some really great stuff right now, including some folks who left Ultra-Orthodoxy, some folks who weren't in Ultra-Orthodoxy but are still doing some really great stuff with Jewish feminism. I think it's really just an incredible time for this kind of revolution that's taking place within the Jewish feminist world. Wow. But at a time when we really need it. I'm still struck by when I was graduating from rabbinical school, that the women that I graduated with, who are some of the most talented, bright, just incredibly thoughtful teachers and mentors and people who can really inspire, still had such a hard time proving themselves as rabbis compared to the men who are graduating, because we have this mental image of what a rabbi is that's been ingrained in us since we were kids, about this older white guy with a long white beard, and that's what a rabbi should be. And as much as so many people think of themselves as, no, I'm progressive, I'm way past all those different things, I think it's still a challenge that is kind of underlies a lot of the different things that goes on in Judaism. So we see a Jewish woman rabbi, and we automatically assume so many alarms go off that far left, super progressive, maybe not be my type of Judaism for some people. And it's like, why are we already doing that in instead of just having the conversation about what people are offering and what's happening in a way where we can really just learn from one another and kind of get rid of this idea of what Judaism was supposed to be, especially because the supposed to be there was something that we invented too. And it wasn't always like that. And all of these different reiterations of Jewish life have changed so profoundly based on different experiences in the Jewish world.
Yeah. It's because as you were describing that situation where your fellow students, and you referred to them as she, them, females, I bristled at that. Me, right. Like, I'm somebody who studies feminism, who like really fancies myself a feminist activist. And the traditional Jew in me was like, nope.
Right.
So, like, there's work for every single person to do on this front. Like, every single one of us, even those of us that consider ourselves like feminists and who study feminism, we need to think about internalized misogyny in the Jewish world, and we need to think about the ways that we can, again, broaden the derech, make it a little bit wider so that there's room for the men with the long white beards and the women with flowy tie-dye dresses. There's room for all of us.
Awesome. So I had a whole idea for like what this conversation was going to be titled, but now I think it has to be titled "Widening the Derech," because that's such a beautiful image. No, I love that, and I want to use that. I mean, there's nothing that can be, there's nothing but good that can come from making the derech wider. Yeah. The more voices we can include in Judaism and Jewish thought and Jewish community, the better we are, and the more robust, and the more I really mean this word, the holier we are, mm-hmm. Right? If the whole idea of Judaism is to connect to one another and to God, we can't connect to God without connecting with all of God's creation, and God's creation is all of who we are, all over the spectrum of what it means to be Jewish and what it means to be a person in general. So thank you. I think that this is a start of a much, much bigger conversation too. So I hope that you and I can talk again. I'd love to have you back, and we can talk a little bit more. But so thank you for sharing your story in such a vulnerable way, and in a way that I know that that's hard, but that's also makes it much more real for us to be able to connect to and to use it as the resource that we need it to be for a lot of people, and to the education that it needs to be. We walk through so much of our lives thinking that we know so many things. We know what's going on in someone's heart, in someone's head, in someone's background, and there's a lot that we don't. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for coming on. Please come back again. Thank you for giving us a really good title for this week.
And I hope to be able to sing Nigunim with you in person at some point in the very near future.
Absolutely. Even if we're doing it via Zoom, you know. Yep. We'll have like a good 4-second delay, and it'll sound really terrible, but the essence, the ikar of the nigun will still be there for sure.
All right. Thank you so much, Yoni.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Great. Thank you.